Broadcasting from the Hip Hop Weekly studios, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Civic Cipher, where our mission is to foster allyship, empathy, and understanding. I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
He is Ramses Ja. I am Q Ward. You are tuned into Civic Cipher.
Indeed you are, and we are riding high this week, which is rare for us. We have a fantastic show in store for you, a lot to stick around for. But the reason we're riding so high is because we are fresh off of a visit to the Congressional Black Caucus in Washington, D.C., where we were able to have another one of those Avengers Assemble moments that Q refers to, where we get to be around some people in the real world who are doing good work. And hopefully we are going to bring that energy into today's conversation. First, about the attack on Tyreek Hill. We're going to be spending some time discussing that. For those that don't know, there was a video of him getting detained on his way to a football game. Q obviously is going to be the person telling this story.
Detained and assaulted.
And assaulted, yes, indeed. And that moment went viral. So we're going to examine that and view it through a cultural lens and examine kind of the breakdown of that, just because as these things continue to happen, people continue to gain insight into what it means to be at the intersection of being black or from a marginalized community and the criminal justice system, or at the hands of law enforcement officials in this country. And then for the second part of the show, we're going to discuss the outcomes that we know so far of the affirmative action repeal by the Supreme Court, specifically how that has affected Asian Americans. That was a community that was really pushing, or some folks in that community were pushing for that reform. So we're going to see how well they've fared. That and so much more to stick around for. But before we get started, as always, let's start with some Ebony Excellence.
Shall we?
I think you shall.
This week's Ebony Excellence is brought to you by Actively Black. There is greatness in our DNA. Visit activelyblack.com. This week's Ebony Excellence, LaDonna Bond. She is the Chief Diversity and Equity Officer at Geico. Her role as Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion encompasses strategic leadership and fostering relationships that reinforce their inclusive culture. With a steadfast commitment to DEI, her focus includes developing strategies that align with their organizational goals and cultivating partnerships that enhance recruitment and workforce diversity. The organization benefits from her expertise in unconscious bias awareness and her adeptness in communication, which she employs to drive awareness and engagement across all levels. These competencies, honed over her tenure in HR at Geico, empower her team to support marginalized communities and champion a workplace where diversity and equity thrive. First of all, in a country where DEI seems to be under attack, it is great that positions like this at corporations as large as Geico still exist, because we saw a lot of people lose employment in these roles across every sector of business. But more importantly, as Ramses mentioned, we were in the nation's capital for the Congressional Black Caucus Annual Leadership Conference, and we got to spend some time in the company of this young lady, and you can see that there's definite intention in her work. It's not just, as we've mentioned before, a black square on Instagram, or not just a post for good PR. She is interested in implementing strategies that have excellent, actual, actionable outcomes for people in marginalized communities.
Yeah. So we had no choice. She has to be our Ebony Excellence. Shout out to LaDonna Bond at Geico. All right. So this is a video that I saw. A lot of people saw this one, especially sports fans. But this isn't a sports show, and this likely isn't a sports station that you're listening to us on. So maybe there's some folks out there who may not be familiar with this. So talk to us a bit about what happened, and then we're going to break it down.
So the video, the body cam footage from the officers who detained, assaulted, and arrested Miami Dolphins wide receiver Tyreek Hill has surfaced. And the interesting thing that I've seen, mostly from people that look like you and I, is that he should have complied. He should have been more polite. He shouldn't have been so rude. And the sad thing is that most of those people are correct. We are not allowed to have dignity. We are not allowed to have a level of self-respect. We are not allowed to know our rights when it comes to us interacting with law enforcement. And the reason why is that none of those things matter if we do not survive the interaction that we're having with law enforcement.
That's a good way to
and
put it.
That we have to take that position even when our rights, our dignity, our self-determination, our self-respect, or our base level of respect is being violated, is a really, really sad truth for black people in this country. And this is a very famous, very wealthy black man, less than a mile from his place of work, which is an NFL stadium, on a game day. And if the crime is a traffic violation, him being removed from his car, slammed to the ground, his face into the pavement, handcuffed, and then assaulted after that. That's the first example of assault. After already being compliant, after already being handcuffed and asked to sit on the ground again after they've stood him up and removed him from the street, he tries to express to the officers that he's injured and is going to have a hard time trying to sit down with no support. Remember, he's in handcuffs. One of the officers, after hearing this, runs over to him and tackles him to the ground again. And all of the escalation of aggressiveness comes from the officers on the basis of do what I say or else. It does not matter if it's actually required of you or if it's actually the law. I said do it, so do it because I said so, or else I'll show you who's boss here. So rewatching the video, could he have been more polite? Sure. Right? All of us have to kind of assume a docile, hyper-respective position with law enforcement to assure that we get the ticket that they're trying to give us and that we get to go home. I think he felt so emboldened for multiple reasons. One, there was nothing asked of him that he didn't comply to according to what was required legally. He provided his ID and documentation for his vehicle, and because he didn't want to end up in tabloids or all over social media, he rolled his tinted windows back up so that he wouldn't have to be embarrassed or, made out to be a criminal for a simple traffic stop. Having a less than overly polite tone with these officers, I would say, seemed to upset them, but absolutely upset them, and led to, what we saw in that video.
So my initial reaction, because I'm looking at a video that, I don't know this person as an athlete, or I don't even know who this person is. I do know that he's black and he's driving a nice car. But I see what I see very often when we discuss stories like this. And I see some things that I've seen just in my normal life. What we have is, you're going to like this word, a system. We have a system where these police officers are doing a job that typically when police interact with citizens, it's not because something happy has taken place, right? So think writing tickets, think getting arrested, think, you've just experienced some form of trauma and you need, the police to come out, or the police are coming out because someone else has called them or something like that. Something bad has happened if the police are there, typically, right? Police don't show up and it's all fun and games. So for people that's been their reality more often than not, the police really stress us out. Again, I'm from California, so I grew up with the LAPD. The LAPD is famous for their mistreatment
or infamous.
Infamous, that's a better way to put it, for their mistreatment of black and brown people. So when the police show up, it's not happy time. It's like, you ever been somewhere and there's a pit bull and it ain't on a leash?
Yes. It's a very, very stressful and uncomfortable situation. I need to immediately know whose dog this is. I need you to get your dog.
Get your dog.
Get your dog.
So, and it's interesting to see people that didn't come from that environment and how they regard the police. They talk to them, have a great time, what I mean? And that's cool, whatever, do your thing. But for a person like me, it just never really felt like I'm not the sort of person that would pet a dog. I got bit by a dog when I was 3 years old. It messed up my head, and I feel like dogs bite. It doesn't matter how small it is, how old it is. You can tell me he doesn't bite. You can't tell that to my brain. It's just like a thing. It's like a trauma thing, right? Same thing with police, right? So I say that to say that when I look at the police, it's interesting how when they choose to interact with you for whatever reason they feel is appropriate, whether or not you have actually done something wrong, you will be subjected to their wishes, okay? And it's almost like they expect you to be happy about it. In other words, be happy while you lick my boot. I want to see you smile when you do it. We already know, look, if I'm getting pulled over, that'll put a dent in my day, okay? It's not something that I was hoping for, expected, happy about. Now I got to go to traffic school, or I got to pay more on my insurance or whatever. I wasn't being a criminal. I didn't see the sign, but, do what you got to do, right? So, of course, I'm not happy about it. Now, for a person like Tyreek Hill, who, as you mentioned, he lives in a different world. He lives in a celebrity world, or an athlete celebrity world.
He lives in a celebrity world.
Okay, so he's a big deal. Yeah, it sounds like it. For someone like that with dark tint on his windows, driving a flashy car, and I say that because you can drive a flashy car because you like the car. You tint the windows dark because you don't want anybody to see you. You want to just enjoy your vehicle, okay? If you have the top off so everybody can see you, that's a different type of, whatever. But he didn't want this all over TMZ or whatever his reason was. So he kept his window rolled up. The officer says...
And important, he rolled down the window to acknowledge the officer and to give them what they requested. So he didn't just keep the window up the whole time and completely ignore them, which I think some people would hear that and say, well, it's his fault what happened to him. He complied as far as what's required of the law.
Sure. But what happens is the officer says, no, keep your window rolled down. And he says something like, you got all my information, just give me my ticket and let me go. Because
I'm running late for work.
Right. So you got it, you called it. I did something wrong. Go ahead and do your job, and then we can get to it. But I can't just sit here with my window open, because that's gonna slow everything down, including your job, right? This is his reasoning. He didn't say all that, but effectually this is what he was communicating in that moment. The officer takes exception to his boldness. The officer takes exception to his defiance.
How dare you not blindly obey?
Thank you.
In the docile and meek tone that I'm demanding of you.
Okay. So with that in mind, the officer says, if you don't roll your window down, I'm going to pull you out of your car. In fact, get out of your car. Right.
To which he says, yes, sir, I'll get out.
Yep. So, but what we have is the officer now escalating it, because the officer feels offended that he did not get the licking of the boot with the smile, right? This is how it looks to me. And you know what? You could argue back and forth with me all day on whether or not the officer was justified in taking him out of the car. You could. I'm just, for the sake of...
You can't argue that with me. You can argue that with Ramses.
Okay, so give me that heat.
Argue that with Q.
Give me that heat, because I'm making a bigger point. But you could argue that the officer was justified in pulling him out of his car because the officer was afraid because the window was up, and the officer doesn't know if there's a gun in the car, and all the, give me all the talking points. I'll take them all, right? But it was what happened after the fact that I think illuminates what Black life in America is like at the intersection of being marginalized from a marginalized community, particularly Black people, and policing. The way that they treated him after they got him out of the car If you haven't seen the video, I implore you to watch it. And this is something that we do on this show quite a bit. It's a thought experiment that I like to play. Imagine that he was, I use this example quite a bit, but imagine that he was, rather than a black NFL quarterback, that he was a 65-year-old privileged corporate executive.
I hate this example that Ramses uses because he interjects age and makes it an old person, where of course everyone will see that will be treated differently. Just imagine he's him, but white. It doesn't have to be an old 65-year-old white man or woman or couple. It doesn't have to be familial. It doesn't have to be more warm. Just white. Same age, same clothes, same jewelry, same car, just white. And the entire interaction is different. Mm-hmm. We know this as fact.
Yeah.
We don't have to paint a picture where the person is easier to root for, easier to be kind to, because it's an older 60-something-year-old white couple. No. Whatever the black person is,
the white equivalent,
just make them white.
Yeah. And it's a very different outcome. And I'd go with that. And to be honest with you, that thought experiment is one that I got from Brian Stevenson. He just talked about a TED Talk, and he was representing a young black child, and he petitioned the court to treat his young black poor defendant like he was a 65-year-old privileged corporate executive. And that was the thought experiment that stayed with me. So that's the thought experiment I run. But to Q's point, absolutely right. You don't even need the rest of those qualifiers. Just make him white, and the story plays differently. And again, everything that happened before he stepped out of the car could be the same. And you could argue that the officers were justified in doing that. But the way they treated him once they got him out of the car was where you're able to see what it's like to be black. What it's like, how slippery a slope even being black is. If you affirm your dignity, if you are not happy about your state of affairs, if you feel maybe the speeding or the reckless driving or whatever it was, maybe there's no racial component to that, right? So anybody could be upset about getting hemmed up by the police, but how he was treated after the fact really shows what the black experience is like. And I think that's why the video has not only gone viral, but has prompted conversations, even the conversation we're having right now, because again, it shows exactly what that looks like, even if you have some privilege, some fame, some wealth, those sorts of things. You don't shed your blackness, and that blackness always presents to people like, well, maybe not always, but often presents to police and other systems like it's a threat, like it is scary, like it is defiant, like it is
it is criminal.
Criminal. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Now, I want to share something with you. This comes from NBC News. The Florida officer investigated over Miami Dolphins star Tyreek Hill's traffic stop and detainment has been suspended 6 times previous to their encounter, received several written reprimands, and was at the center of numerous complaints, according to his employee profile. The Miami-Dade Police Department released the employee profile of Officer Danny Torres, showing he was suspended for as many as 50 days between 2014 and 2019. The first suspension was for 5 days in February of 2014. The records show he received 3 more 5-day suspensions in 2016, 1 in February and 2 in September. In October of 2018, he received a 20-day suspension and 10 days in June of the following year. Records also show that Torres, a 27-year veteran, received 4 written reprimands between March of 1999 and September of 2020. So, what I see is an officer who said, if you don't roll your window down, I'm going to take you out of the car. Matter of fact, get out of the car. That officer with a God complex, that officer with a predisposition toward violence, with a predisposition toward bullying, with a predisposition toward whatever. Tyreek Hill, in my estimation, did not do anything threatening or criminal, beyond obviously whatever reckless driving or speeding or whatever that may have or may have not been the case. In the video, I did not see anything overtly criminal, but the officer treated him criminal. I think, to your point, Q, because of the color of his skin.
And because he could.
Thank you. Now, let's say you have a company, Q, and your company, you employ people to work for you, and you have one employee who needs to be reprimanded. You reprimand the employee, and goes back to work and business as usual. If the employee gets reprimanded a second time, you may notice, okay, there's growing pains, or maybe there's a little bit of a problem, but they'll work through it, whatever. After the third time, are you as likely to forgive a person or a person you had to suspend or reprimand?
It becomes less about my personal decision to forgive versus the well-being of my company and this person's colleagues and coworkers.
And the integrity, yes, exactly.
So to create a safe and non-aggressive or non-hostile workplace, excuse me, for my other employees, and if we are a customer-facing company like law enforcement, and I guess their customer is the state or the municipality that they work for, but
who's paying the taxes?
Front-facing position like that, I have to also create a non-hostile environment for those who may have to interact with this employee.
Sure.
So I need to make it where it's less about my personal feelings for this person, and there has to just be some standard set for everyone that works for me, right? So a conversation with HR about next steps for this person, and maybe termination after the third, fourth, and fifth time, let alone the sixth, and then this person continues to work for me.
Yeah.
It shows that I'm a bit callous and a bit reckless with regards to the people that this officer has to work with and the citizens that this officer has to interact with, when they've shown that the rules, whatever those rules are, seem to not mean much to them if we've gotten to suspension number 6 and counting.
Now, I think your point is well made that, a system, when we talk about systems of white supremacy and systems of oppression, what we are viewing here is a system that allows this sort of person to continue to do this sort of thing to what I suspect is a very specific type of individual. So this Tyreek Hill arrest, I think, is rather more than, of course we know it's rather more than an isolated incident, but I think that it illuminates exactly what it is that we're trying to say, and it does so, again, for the benefit of a national audience, because this is a national news story. This man was on his way to work, but imagine someone who wasn't on his way to work at a football stadium. He's just going to the post office or going to the burger shop or whatever, and being mistreated and robbed of his dignity by the police, and there's no one to tell his story. That same system that is oppressing Tyreek Hill also oppresses that man.